Hello, thank you for joining me. My name is Donavan from Salt of the Streets, and this is the review preview for the months of November and December. Our November book this year was How to Have Impossible Conversations by James Lindsay and Peter Boghossian, and our December book, which of course I took the cover off, is Jarhead by Anthony Swaffer. I do love hardcovers, cannot stand the actual dust covers. Can't stand them, take them off every time. So, we'll start with the review portion of this video. I really enjoyed How to Have Impossible Conversations, right? Surprise, this one is going to be different than all the other ones that we've done. I expected, for some reason, when I started this venture of the book club, for all these videos to be the exact same, in the same format. But as unique as all of the books have been, so have our review previews. So I really enjoyed this book. It was very dense as far as information goes. It wasn't a super thrilling read. It was not very capturing, but it was very information dense. There were multiple chapters, I think 6 different chapters that had a multitude of different steps involved with them, all the way from the beginner level. Yeah, so there was 8 chapters, including the conclusion, all the way from beginner level steps to master level, 2 keys to conversing with ideologues that were obviously ways for you to go about having an impossible conversation. And I'm not going to summarize this book because that's not really how it was even intended to be taken in. You're supposed to go through this chapter by chapter and implement each of these steps in actual active conversation before you move on to the next one, or else I think that it will, as the book says, and as I think after reading it, it will be extremely difficult to be able to get all of this done. There, as it goes on, is a lot of borderline manipulation involved with the people that you're having conversations with, and the conversations that you're having, it requires that you be very disconnected emotionally for what's happening, so you can be present and aware of the way that you are interacting and the way that your partner is interacting, and that takes an immense amount of practice to get to that step, to be able to be having the conversation and be involved in it and be engaged, and also be able to be monitoring it from that type, like 3,000 foot level, to be able to try and control like that. So this book reminds me a lot of other books that you can find that are about power, right? And it's not a bad thing at all. There's no malice in this book. There is no, that's why I said borderline manipulation, because there isn't anything to try and do anything negative to anybody. You're not trying to take advantage of anyone. The whole goal of this is, as the title states, is how to have impossible conversations. You're just trying to have a good conversation through a very difficult topic that is conducive, that maybe you are changing your opinion or the other person is changing their opinion. Whoever is on the quote-unquote wrong side of it is adjusting their opinion accordingly to the information that is presented during the conversation. So the power books that I have seen are all about how to have power over other people, and those deal with, I'm going to say, tactics much closer to manipulation than this book in and of itself. So a lot of the later and more complicated techniques are operating essentially with the intent for the other person, with the intent the other person won't know. So there is that element of manipulation just because you're trying to do it without them knowing, so they don't feel like they're being manipulated, but you're not necessarily trying to guide them to a specific end other than keep them involved and not upset and thinking rationally. One of the later tactics that I remember, and it's okay if you didn't get there, because like I said, I think this is really best doing as they say. Chunk it up, take your time, read the first steps, implement them in conversation, and move forward. A lot of this that I took from it is listening. Listen way more. Talk way less. If you listen to the show, I talk a ton. Obviously, we do this for 6 hours every time we do it. I talk a ton. And that's because this show is conveying information. And I don't know whether or not I said this on one of the live streams. I know I said it in conversation with Colin, that I discovered before this, but it was cemented for me reading this, that I know for certain I'm very good at conveying information. When I have an article, something that I want to tell to you, I have no problem conveying that to you very concisely, quickly, and efficiently. If I want to have a conversation with you that we get to the absolute end, we're both happy and we really solve a problem, I am not the best at having conversations. I think a lot. I think sometimes past where the conversation is. I talk a lot. I have a bad habit. I know I said this in one of the live streams. I have a bad habit of relating things back to myself. And that's not always a negative thing, but in regards to this particular book in this text, when you're trying to progress a conversation and build rapport like they're describing it, a better tactic is to relate what the person said back to themselves and ask more questions to dive deeper to just build that relationship more. So that is something that I have been trying to work on, asking way more questions, listening more to specific details, and fighting the initial urge that I have of, oh, that reminds me about this thing that I experienced, this story that I had, this book that I read, this whatever. I have tried to implement more focusing on the other person, which is just a way for me to build that skill of building rapport so that when I am in a more difficult discussion, I can try and turn that on and use that tactic when I'm there. One of the more manipulative, quote unquote, tactics that I read about in here was called alter casting, right? And that is where, if I'm having a conversation with Colin over here, and I think he might be kind of unreasonable, but I want to put him in a place where he's going to answer the question that will allow us to continue, I will say, you seem like a really reasonable person who is good at having calm conversations. How would you handle this particular thing? Right? That puts Colin in the mindset of, I am a reasonable person and I need to answer this question like a reasonable person, even if I am acting unreasonable at this particular time. It is a way to try and push someone into the mindset of the type of conversation you want to have. A lot of this stuff, it sounds kind of silly. After reading it and building on the other stuff, it makes a lot of sense, and I think could be very useful when having very difficult conversations. So one of the things, again, that I thought a lot of is some of the difficult conversations that I have had in the past. Right? Some of the mistakes that I have made in the past. And some of them you guys have seen here. So it's great that we can have this discussion here. So I'll start with the ones that you haven't seen, right? With my wife. I have been with Jordan for going on 10 years now. We've been together and we have been married since 2016. So we're going on year 7 here in June. And obviously we've both done an immense amount of growing in the time that we have been together. And I was able to identify a ton of my previous mistakes going through this book. And some of them are being very uncharitable, right? One of the great things I pull from this is build golden bridges. And that is a way to say, give someone a charitable out from something that they've said. Don't assume that whatever they said is the worst thing that they meant. Try and give them the benefit of the doubt and always assume, even if they said it questionably, that they're not trying to be an asshole. They're not trying to manipulate you. They're not trying to be rude. They're not trying to do any of that type of stuff. And that can be very, very, very difficult when things are tense, especially with my wife. And that's why that's the situation I focused on, is because those are obviously some of the more tense conversations that you can have is with your significant other. And so when I get upset, I can get real nitpicky, and I get, as you've seen on the show, very definition focused and detail focused, and I will hone in on specific things that not just her, anybody has said, and I'm going to drill you on it. If that said it's inconsistent from what you said earlier, and this, when you're having a difficult conversation, especially with someone that you care about, especially your wife or your significant other, that's not a productive way to communicate. You need to be more charitable. It is helpful to be more charitable and give them the benefit of that doubt, and especially if they've realized that they've made a mistake. And that's what the Golden Bridge thing is really focused on. Don't shove it in their face that they realize now that they're wrong about whatever they said before. So that's all right. People make mistakes. It's fine. Move on from that. You have, in a very base sense, you have won this. You won that. This person realizes they are wrong. You don't need to drive home the fact that they fucked up when they first made their position known. So that's some of the ways that I've been trying to implement that with my wife. As far as Jake Lines, right? This is a really great way. I saw some mistakes that we both made, right? And one of the things that I identified that James Lindsay Pedagogian talked about is the unread library fallacy, right? That is when you have heard someone describe a theory or an idea or a story or an issue, and instead of researching that policy or that issue, that story yourself and learning about it yourself, you took what they said and you've run with that. So you think that you have a good understanding of this story, this particular issue, because of the amount of information that you took from this particular person, this particular source, but you don't actually know about it. That is the unread library fallacy. And I'm not trying to shit on anybody. I'm not taking any hits. I'm not taking anything, right? But if you go back and you watch the episode that we did with Jake Lyons, right, and we had kind of this rough interaction about religion and God and stuff like that, some of the questions that we asked reverted back to these discussions that he had been having and these videos that he'd been watching from this particular person, this particular group of people, that the text and the justification for it was like the Bible, was either a text that he wasn't able to validate beyond that. And I think part of that, and I don't fault him for that, this is a natural side effect of having conversations first in a group and then expanding them, was that the other people that he's talking to seem to be operating under the same ideology that's feeding into that, and it's not forcing them to fully research that issue. This is not him specifically. It's not him alone. This is happening to people all over the place. This is just an example that I know you guys have seen, right? Another past conversation was when we had Creatrix on here, right? We had Brandy on here, and I took a lot of shit personally. It was not... I think about this episode often. It was not our best time as hosts of the show. It was not our best time as Salt of the Streets hosts. It was not our best time as podcasters. This particular show where we probably drank a little bit too much. We got very comfortable. We were having a lot of conversations. We were freewheeling. Colin would make a statement, and instead of sitting back and making Colin defend his own, or allowing Colin to defend his own statement, I would step in and I would say something. It wasn't my own statement. I'm taking offense to something. I'm defending it. That's not a conducive way to have a conversation. I wasn't the best example. Was, I don't even remember specifically what she said. Brandy said something to the effect about, you were talking about anarchism, and she said something about allowing militias to be police. And I was like, well, I don't want to say that I'm offended because I'm just said I wouldn't be, but I'm borderline offended because I identify as part of the militia. So that's not only did I not ask her what her definition of militia was, right, which is defining terms is one of the first things that they talk about in here, is get your definition straight out. If you're going to have a difficult conversation, know what the other person is talking about. I didn't ask her what her definition was. I didn't ask her what she's talking about. I immediately said, I'm kind of offended by what you just said because I identify as part of the militia. I'm also appealing to identity. That's not a cohesive way to have a conversation. It's not being charitable with the way that she's saying something, and it's also not giving her an easy way to reverse what she said to say, that's actually not what I meant at all. This is what I was talking about. Right there, that's 4 horrific mistakes in one interaction in a multi-hour podcast that we did with her. So it's crazy easy to do. That was less than 2 years ago that we did that podcast. So I highlight that to show that I've been doing this with Colin for 4 years now, and I still am making these mistakes. Still. And that's why I think this book, and I'm sure there are tons of other books like it, are very useful. And I think probably everybody should read it because it will help you identify mistakes that you've made like that are very simple, very easy to adjust, help you address them and fix them in conversations in the future. So because I've had them here, and especially because those conversations are recorded and I can watch them anytime that I want, I can relive those mistakes and I can try and adjust those things so I don't ever do them in the future. Because if Brandy wasn't so cool, that might make her not ever want to come on the show again. But she's still interacted with Colin. He met up with her in Boston. Like, it's very cool. She's a very cool person, so it was fine. If she was less charitable, if she didn't build a golden bridge, then she would probably never fucking talk to us again. She's interacted with us many times since then because she is good at having conversations and is willing to build us a golden bridge to not be assholes for making idiots of ourselves, right? These are excellent things. They're great examples, and they underline why everybody should be constantly working on their conversation skills, whether it is on a podcast with people you've never met before on the other side of the country, whether it is one of your best friends you do the podcast with, whether it is one of your best friends you don't do a podcast with, or your wife or your husband, your children, because your children are people and you deserve to have cohesive conversations with them. That matters, whether they're toddlers or teenagers or anything. They deserve respect and equality in a conversation to try and understand what you're saying. This matters. And these are things you can also implement with your children when they're young so they can have an easier time communicating and interacting with people when they get older. It's very important, this type of stuff, to know what you're talking about, to have an idea about conversations, not just think, so walking into this show, I was saying all the time, I'm a fucking great communicator. I'm a fantastic communicator. I'm an okay communicator. I'm very good at delivering information. Very good at that. I'm a pretty good communicator. That is what I would say. So I would recommend this type of book for everybody. This one specifically because I read it and I will be revisiting it in the future, maybe every November from here on out, because it's just an opportune time. Who knows? But I definitely will be reading this book again. With that, we'll move on to the preview portion of this video. Our December book is Jarhead by Anthony Swafford. Why December? Why did we pick this book for December? All through high school, this was one of my favorite books. It was my favorite book. I read it 12 times once, back to back.
It's like because it's Christmas and your birthday, and that's why you're doing it?
That's exactly correct. Christmas and my birthday, and I get to do what the fuck I want. So, I started to read this book again already. It is fucking so good. It's so good already. I was really scared when I started to read it that it wasn't going to be good, that it was only going to be, and I was like, maybe it was just high school me that really enjoyed this. No, started to read it. It's very good. So I don't regret it. Author and publisher, obviously the author is Anthony Swafford. It says Scribner down here at the bottom. No. Yes, but we'll see. Let's see. Scribner. Yep. Copyright 2003 by Anthony Swafford. Yep. That's it. Scribner. So, let's see. This book is for the U.S. Marines of Surveillance and Target Acquisition Platoon, 2nd Battalion, 7th Marine, August 1990 to April 1991, and in memory of my brother. Page and pace. Let's see. We are at... Let's see. Some of these are just one-page chapters. Acknowledgements. We are 257, and there's 31 days in December, obviously. So, Colin... What are we looking at? 8.29 pages a day.
Nothing.
No problem. Especially because this book is screaming. And that is also just this copy of this book. The one that I have at home that I packed up is a small copy. It's like a pocket soft cover copy. So I don't know if it has the same number of pages as this book. That is just this particular copy. I will check the other one after I unpack. And I'll see what the difference is, and we'll see if there is a difference.
But we call that the mass paperback version of it.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it's the mass paperback version. That's the one that I have. I got it in a used bookstore when I was in high school. Pages Books in Silverdale. So, yeah. So 257. I think that's great. I'm a huge fan. Let's see. Live stream dates. What are we going to do live streams, right? We're going to go for tentatively the 6th. Right? Tentatively the 6th, definitely the 13th and the 20th. No problem. 20th is 4 days before my birthday. It's going to be screaming. And guys, these ones aren't going to be outside. They're going to be in my office. It's going to be great. Yeah, it's going to be fantastic. It's going to be in an office. Not going to be outside. I'm not going to be freezing my butt off. It's going to be great. So the last thing I think that we have is just a reading from this particular book here. So we will find a random page. We'll open her up. We will stop right there. Perfect. Start a new chapter. See.
If and this is about like stirring the like burning shit, because that's the only thing that I remember from that movie.
Let's see here. It's from page 111. We called Fergus Rocker because he wanted to become a rock star or a singing actor. His father, already in his 70s, had been a Protestant preacher, and Fergus's aging mother was the choir director of all his father's congregations. Fergus sang rock lyrics to the tune of Amazing Grace. He had an okay voice, but hard metal tunes sung toward phantom church balconies are hard on the ear. Fergus had dusty brown hair, a receding hairline, and a round face, and he looked like the young son of septuagenarians, as though he had been on a shelf for many years before being born. Fergus hadn't actually passed the indoc he took, but I told Sergeant Dunn I would train Fergus personally, and if he failed, it would be my failure. I knew Fergus was smart. He'd placed last in one or two of the physical endurance tests, but passed with high marks everywhere else. I saw some of my same complaints against the Corps in his face. He became a good stay Marine, though he required much of my time and attention. After we returned from war, while most of us concentrated on drinking, partying, and inadvisable sex, Fergus took voice and acting lessons at the community theater in Yucca Valley, 20 miles west of base. One Saturday evening, I watched Fergus deliver a strong performance in the title role of Chekhov's Uncle Vanya. Afterward, the cast and friends went to a cafe in Joshua Tree near the national park. The cafe was a great find for Fergus and me. There wasn't a single jarhead in the place, and contrary to a custom for business within missile range of a military establishment, the cafe's walls weren't covered with pictures of nearby units and weapons and munitions and dumb, smiling GIs giving you the bird. Fergus and I began hanging out at the cafe. We received a coffee education from the owner. He was happy to talk to us about Camus and Celine and Chekhov. A former massage therapist to the stars, he'd recently escaped LA and was pleased with the pace of the high desert. He had pictures of former clients taped to the counter, and he claimed to know where Cyndi Lauper had recently bought a home in Joshua Tree. We were, of course, not interested in the location of Cyndi Lauper, but his cafe offered a sober alternative to the bars in Palm Springs and San Diego, dollar shots until 10 p.m., and jarheads brawling in the streets with college kids.
I don't remember that at all from the movie.
No, this is, the movie is a small portion of what is covered in this book. Yeah. A lot of the stuff that they used as far as narration for the movie is in the first 75 pages of the book. Yeah, there's a ton of more material in the book than there is in the actual movie. It's fantastic.
So since you have read this book before,
yes,
and you've also
seen
the movie,
some time,
but give people a little rundown on the differences that you know of so far between the movie and the book. Like, how is the book better than the movie at this point? 'Cause the movie is just a kind of a war movie.
Yes,
in a way.
Yeah, the movie itself is good. You go through, he is in indoctrination, in doc and stuff like that, which you don't really cover much of that in the book itself, but you kind of have to do that in a military movie to go through in doc, and that's where he gets selected for sniper training and stuff like that. And you do eventually talk a little bit about that, but the book is way more about his mental state during the actual Desert Storm. And in a movie, it's way more difficult to get that type of stuff across. So they have to focus more on kind of the broad war experience. But yeah, the book itself is focused way more on his personal story, his actual mental state for a lot of it. It's much better, much deeper insight. I'm a big fan of that. That's it. And I think with that, we can finish up this episode of the review preview. So I will see you guys during the live streams. Like I said, tentatively on the 6th, but definitely on the 13th and the 20th. And this book is going to be excellent. I'm really excited to hear what you guys think. And watch this, obviously, on our youtube.com, Salt of the Streets. We have our instagram.com/Salt of the Streets, patreon.com/Salt of the Streets. Go there, sign up, help us make more, better content just like this. You can go to saltofthestreets.com, find all of this information, including our own personal social media. I am at Salt of the Street on Twitter and at alpaca_Donavan on Instagram. And Colin is at Big Red Offie on both those things. Thank you guys very much, and I will see you for the live streams. Keep booking it up. Pow, 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 pow.
Welcome to the Salt of the Streets, coming at you every week with this food for thought. Hope you ready.